in globalization really comes about because of our communications. Our communications are instantaneous. We can literally sit in our own living room and watch something in color as it happens on the other side of the world. And a phenomena even worse yet. You can sit at a desk and tap a few keys and have some words come up on a screen, push another one, and instantaneously on the other side of the world, someone else has the same words on their screen. Communications are instantaneous. The reason for communications is to come to know you, come to know all about you. That's the reason for communication. To get to know people. Especially people that are new to us. And on the world level, I would want that to refer quite readily, especially get to know people of a different culture from our own. Now what we've done is we've put globalization into economic terms. So much so that National Public Television was able to put on a series of 4 different presentations called Commanding Heights, talking about globalization solely, completely in economic terms. And the book has come from that, or that has come from the book. But it deals with the whole history of globalization as if it were only an economic system, or a way of dealing with economic systems, or something that really touches on and only touches on economics. We don't understand that what it comes from is the way we get to know people, to understand and to appreciate people. And that should be on the world level. We've even come to dividing the world in 2 parts. The rich and the poor, the have and the have-nots. We've even taken terminology like the first and the third world to refer to those who have and those who have not. Not realizing that this terminology comes from a time during the height of the Cold War when 120 nations were gathered in the city of Bucharest or Budapest, I'm not too sure. It's maybe Budapest, where it was gathered. And these nations were asked, which system of governing and economics do you prefer? The democratic, capitalistic system? Or the communistic, socialistic system? Which do you prefer? And 2/3 of the world said, we want a third way. That's where that terminology came about. Now, I haven't seen that third way outlined, but they preferred a way different from the other 2. But now that is faded with the fading of the communistic socialistic system. And so we've just simply taken the terminology first and third, rich and poor. Any kind of writing on integral human development, you'll see a very common statistic. 80% of the world's resources are in the hands of 20% of the world's population. Thus, the flip-flop. 20% of the remaining world's resources must be shared by 80% of the world's population. We look at the world commonly this way. I don't think that has really much to do with coming to know. Liberation theology writers of the 70s were asked the question, what does this part of the world think about this part of the world? Why do they think they're poor? And 2 of the writers, brothers, their last name Boff, B-O-F-F, Brazilian writers, first names Clovis and Leonardo, writing a little book on liberation theology in general, simply calling it Introducing Liberation Theology, and this in 1970. Took on that question. And on page 136, their comment is, well, this world looks on this through three sets of eyes. One, empirical. In other words, you're poor, and though it's not the terminology that they use, it's certainly what they say, because you're dumb and lazy. So if you'll work hard and save money like we do, you'll get out of this situation. So then, of course, how do you handle that? Charity. The kind of charity where they got a fellow selling pencils out of a sombrero on the corner, and so you toss him a quarter and say, hey, keep the pencil, guy. Second, attitudes of the first towards the third world. See them through functional eyes. In other words, the reason you're poor is you're uncivilized. That's the terminology that the Buff brothers use. You're not with it. You're not into the 20th. You're not into the 21st century. So we got to get you there. We're going to do that. We're going to do that by teaching you with projects and programs. And as we say in Spanish, that word that carries so many connotations today, capacitar. We're going to capacitate you. Will make you worthwhile. And the third way is dialectical. In other words, you who are living in this part of the world that we commonly refer to as the poor, you become the subject. We'll ask you, why are you poor? And the Buff brothers comment, it doesn't take them long to answer. And they say, because we are oppressed. Now that word, I think we have to be careful with because it carries so many connotations. When I use it, I want it to mean because we're not able to live the culture we want to live. Oppressed. We're not able to live the culture we want to live. When I speak of culture, of course, I don't speak of dressing up going to the opera. I want to speak of the life way of a people. The life that the people want to live. The relationships they want to have with the transcendental, with nature, with one another, with all aspects of living together, society and education and health. All of these relationships go up the life way we want to live. We're not able to live the one we want to, therefore, we're oppressed. There's so many aspects of that that take a long time to catch on to. I was mentioning to some of you when we were conversing at dinner the other night about how coming here I had no preparation. I am what you call in the Roman Catholic tradition a diocesan priest. That is, I am ordained for a particular area. I have one boss, that's the bishop. An area made up of so many counties in a state. I am there to be the assistant to the bishop and serving the Roman Catholics in that area. And that's what my preparation is, my formation. We're oftentimes referred to as secular priests. We don't belong to any kind of a special institution with a special charism and a special effort. We're kind of the grassroots general guys. And so we don't have preparation in crossing cultures and serving in that way, or as we say often, mission or missionary. We're not that. And so it was decided by the bishops that this would be one of the areas the area or diocese that I am from is going to come and help out in this diocese, and we were looking for volunteers. I didn't want to volunteer. I didn't know where Guatemala was and didn't care, but I was teaching in the high school and working in a parish in western Minnesota, I liked that a lot. And I thought if somebody wanted to do this kind of thing, it'd be kind of nice. And there was a priest in the diocese that wanted to, so I had a little group of people. We were collecting some money and putting so much a month into the kitty, and then send it down. So when he would eventually go down, it'd be there for him. Just one of those kind of things, getting people involved. We're dealing with a lot, a couple of dollars a month or something. And so apparently the bishop thought that I was really into this thing. So when he sent a letter around looking for volunteers to come and assist the priest that wanted to come for 5 years, and then return home and somebody else go down and continue the assisting. You were looking for volunteers for that. I got the letter, like I said, I want to volunteer. So I threw the letter away. When he came out for confirmations, he mentioned this to me about that letter I wrote. Oh yeah. Oh, yeah. What about I don't know what that is. I don't know where it is. I don't care. So I do what I'm doing right now. I like very much. I'd like to continue doing it the rest of my life. So I didn't respond. Well, he said, your chances of going are nil because there are so many people volunteering, but you should respond to your bishop. So I got all embarrassed, as a young priest, and wrote down a letter, sent it off. May of 1963, really a nice letter. What do you want to show your mother? You have been chosen. I was the only one that wrote. Nobody else wrote. Now what? Oh my. So I had 3 months preparation in a little school put out by the people called Marino, again within the Roman Catholic tradition. They're the real pros in this. They're the ones that prepare themselves, get prepared, and prepare themselves, and that's their charism to cross cultures and serve. We had a great little school up in the northwestern part of the country in a place called Huehuetenango. And they had a very good Spanish course, one-on-one kind of thing, and then they also had some lectures on culture. I had it for 3 months. And, 3 months, that was it for Spanish, period. I hadn't had any before. Oh, wow. Well, it's not going to be so bad. There's somebody there that wants to be there. All I have to do is follow the dues I'm told, go home when I finish my 5 years. When I got here, he was called back to Minnesota because he is a member of the Minnesota National Guard. And his division was going to Vietnam, and as chaplain, he had to be with them. So I ended up the only foreigner here for a year. Wow. If you had any brains or humility, you'd have gone home. And so, oh my. What was happening during the time, and I didn't realize it, but it was, the people were feeling sorry for me because I couldn't talk, I didn't understand, and I couldn't understand what they were saying. So they started to take care of it. And they did it in a lot of different ways. They started to tell me what they thought should be done. And then I would say, well, yeah, that's a great idea. And not because I thought it was a good idea, but I didn't know what else there could possibly be. And so everything we do, even to this day, is built on that expressed felt need. People talking about these things. And this would be something that would be good to try. And so, well, yeah, let's try it. And the way they took care of us, I remember reading the story of creation. The Mayas, one of the stories, kind of an amalgamation of them, where the Father God, Hunahpu, creates the world in 5 days, and then he goes about attempting to create humankind, stone and breaks and clay, and he shatters and wood. And the wooden person cannot thank the Creator as informers, and so no longer then they cannot have spirit. And so although Mother God says, I will create humankind, so she goes to Grandmother God Ishmukane and asks how. And Grandmother God tells her to take corn from my grinding stone. And so Alom does, and she makes humankind of corn, and we become the people of corn. Now, any story of creation, in any religious tradition, speaks of values and principles that people live. Because the story of creation can only come about after a culture is strong enough to support philosophers and theologians. And then they go about in this analysis and this observation, this study on their parts. And this is where they gather these values and principles that people live just automatically, and then they have to give a base to them, and that's where the story of creation comes about. And so within that story of the Mayas, you see these values and principles popping out. The man in a relationship with a woman is the provider. That's how who made the world in 5 days. But then the woman is the source of life and sustainer of life through food, because that's what she does. Alone creates humankind of food, corn. And you find all of these things out by going to the wisdom people. They're the aged. It's a great culture. You don't have to be smart, you got to be 60. Works good. The aged people are seen and recognized as those to be respected for their wisdom. It's interesting, I remember pursuing this in discussion with catechists and saying, you got 3 gods then, Unapu, Alone, and Nishmukani. No, just one. And the reason is you can't have a father god without a mother god, and you can't have a mother and father god without a grandmother god. So they all fits together. And of course, I'll push them a little bit, this and that and the other thing, and they'll come right back at me, the Roman Catholic tradition. Well, tell me about God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. How do you work that one? How many you got? That story of creation, of course, it's nice. This is theirs. It's not the one I'm from, but that's fine. I was standing out in front of church one day, and a fellow came running across the patio, and he said, Padre, my wife just died. Who is going to make my tortillas? Well, I thought, just like the gringo I am. Look, guys, we're dealing with tragedy here now, and you're worried about lunch? Let's get over that. By that time, I didn't enough mistakes, so I could ask the guy, please sit down a moment. I ran down the street and got our encyclopedia. His name is Marcos Tum. Marcos knows everything. You always go and ask Marcos. So I told him what happened. He says, geez, Padre, you didn't say anything, did you? And I said, no. He said, thank God. He's not talking about eating. He's trying to tell you his source of life is no longer with him. How is he going to live? So you come with me, I talk, you listen, and please don't say anything. In the same vein, I remember so well being told quietly about a program we involved in. We were, the Food for Peace program, U.S. government, under Humphrey and Kennedy. Well, we were getting this through the Catholic relief services, and they're reaching out throughout the world. So we were getting 100-pound sacks of cornmeal, soy meal, and powdered milk, and 100-pound sacks of flour. And of course, the people wouldn't know how to deal with this, so we would make it into a real rich gruel, kind of what they call a toll, heavy drink using the soy meal, cornmeal, and powdered milk. Put a little sugar in, some cinnamon, heat it up good, cook it with water. It was really something that kids liked. And then the flour too, they wouldn't know what to do with that, so we had the bakeries make bread, and then we would go around town, even to the point of having a barrel with 2 milk cans on the side and a big basket of bread on top, and stopping at the different corners and dipping out. The fellow would dip out this atoll for the people and give so many pieces of little bread, buns, for the number of kids in the family. And they're always grateful and they're very nice. I was really proud of that. I kind of bragged about it. Pretty good. Got some pictures. One day, a fellow named Ricardo Aquac, who at that time was director of auxiliary teachers in school, came to me just before class when I was wandering around over in school, and he said, Padre, something happened this morning at home, and you're not going to believe it, but it's true. So what's that about? He said, my wife Wichi came up to me and she said, did you notice anything different about the tortillas today? And I said to her, Wichi, you always make good tortillas, but somehow or another they tasted better today. And she said they were. It's the first time we've ever had tortillas made from corn that we have produced, we have raised on our own land. Oh, fine. Knowing that no scientific examination would verify what he said. But at the same time, you know, if you want to feel about it that way, that's fine. I still didn't catch on what he was telling me. Some days later, Ricardo, con the Encyclopedia Marcos, and a couple of other fellows came and they said, you know, Padre, it's giving us your food. It's nice, you know, it's good. But rather than give us your food, help us buy land so we can produce and raise our own food. You know, when you think about it, yeah, food is an integral part of culture. It's very basic to culture. It's very real in culture. It's one of the unifying factors in culture. And the people have to produce their own to be able to feel that they're living their own culture. And especially with the Mayas and that tremendous relationship with Mother Earth and knowing God through creation and the value in the imports. These rains that we got just a short time ago, now that's not even considered rain. That would be considered a blessing of God upon Mother Earth. So that terribly important part of the culture, I wasn't even taken into consideration. And so when they told me about that, it kind of started to dawn more and more. Well, yeah, sure. We can bring our food in and give them as a help, but it can't be an end in itself. It's got to be quite definitely a means to them, and that is a means to helping sustain these people to get them strong enough and build up and give them time to be able to get their own fields into production. So we've been very much involved in that. That's been one of our key efforts, is helping people get land of their own. We've dealt with about pretty close to 3,700 families now over the years. Get land of their own. Key to live in their own culture. But this kind of teaching, this kind of showing me, this kind of taking care of me, was something that was very, very important, especially in that first year, and then the years following. And it's been paramount in everything that we're involved in. But being able to live the culture that you want to live, that's when a people can be free to be who they can be, as they want to be. Questions or thoughts on this?
I had something I'm thinking as we were talking about it for their culture. Would they desire to stay the status quo? I mean, where the Mayan culture was 200 years ago, not today. Do they see a future that they're gravitating towards something like our culture, or?
Well, certainly, you know, the last golden age of the Maya was somewhere between 700 and 900. And a return to a golden age today would be considerably different, because culture, as part of the human condition, is changes. But these relationships that are key to culture would be terribly important. And so maintaining those relationships as best can within this growth or change or whatever you want to call it within culture would be of utmost importance. Would they want to become like our agriculture today? Just a little bit of a look. The agriculture that we live, and I just, when I was in the States last week, they're honoring Borlaug again in his Nobel Prize for Peace for his famed Green Revolution in the 60s and 70s. But the results of that, our agriculture at home is primarily to push a plant to its utmost limits. So a given plant will produce more, larger, more easily processed grains or seeds. But in order to do that, we have to hybridize, get them all the same, so that we can push them right to the limits. In order to push, we have to use all kinds of literally artificial fertilizers. And so we make them out of chemicals with a petroleum base. And then, since all of the plants are exactly alike, and insects function by sight, once they see a field of this, it's very easy for them to descend if they're all the same. So we have to protect the plant against insects. And then fungus, when that attacks, it attacks a similar plant. That's when they're all the same. So we have to protect against that. And because these plants grow fast, because you're pushing so hard to get that maximum seed, whatever the grain is, you have to be careful and let it go, get out of the way. So you have to use herbicides to protect it against the weed growth. And then when it's ready to be harvested, it has to be done by machinery, because if you try it by hand, these huge seeds and each plant will fall off. So you have to have a machine that will let it get it right away and catch it. And cut it all done. And since it all comes at once, you got to do it very quickly. Otherwise, you'll lose it. And so our agriculture at home has come to the point right now where the farmer has nothing to say about the cost of his production. Nothing whatsoever. All depends upon the price of the hybrid seed that he purchases, the cost of the chemicals he needs, and the cost of the machinery and the operation of that machinery that he is told. Then when you have this huge production of food, then the farmer, who's not involved at all in the processing, has absolutely nothing to say about the value of his production. But that depends on what the market says. That's always dealing in futures. So much so that in the state of Minnesota, year before last, 55% of farm income came from government subsidy. Right now, in the struggles to get free trade arrangements with Europe, with other parts of the world, with the U.S., the reason they don't want to deal with any kind of free trade in agriculture is because of the governmental subsidies for farming at home, necessary to maintain it. If the farmers don't have that subsidy, they can't operate. The cost of production is way too high. They can't even today purchase seed this year, grow a plant, take the seed from that plant and plant it next year. Can't do that. There's a patent on the hybrid seed. So our form of agriculture has gone to a point where the farmer is not free at all. Secondly, there's now a great fear of what is happening to the soils, to our water table, and to our streams, etc., with the extensive use of chemicals that we must use to be able to sustain our form of agriculture. So much so that, was it about 3 years ago, they had that big meeting, UN meeting in Cairo on population and development. And even people like Brown for Bread for the World were writing, we got to do something about population growth, because if we don't, we're not going to be able to feed them in so many years. Because our form of agriculture has reached its limits. Now they're trying to do something with genetics, to protect the plants, etc., more. What is the result of that? We really don't know. But the fear is the loss of the grain. Several years now, we're talking 10, maybe 12, there were experts from the University of California, Davis, going to different parts of Guatemala, and they came and spent several days with us, asking to have people take them into the fields in the mountains and help them find corn seed that goes back as close to the original as they could find. Corn seed that hadn't been infected any way whatsoever by hybrid. And I remember there were several days of different people who grow corn in the mountains taking them out, and they finding some of the seed that they were looking for and just thrilled to death. And they took it back to California Davis to be able to hold it in seed banks, just in case our hybridization takes us right out of corn, which is one of the most important versatile grains that we have. And so, would our people be dealing? I don't think so. Not only for what I've been speaking of, because I think we have to change our attitude. We have to give space in this world. Space in this world to, rather than go about an agriculture where you're attempting to get major amounts and size of grains from a single plant, how to get more food from a smaller piece of ground. And see, our people here would be on the way. Because our people, when they get a chance to farm their own land with 4 crop, a piece of land, have 4 crops growing at the same time. It's an interesting look at the diversity. Since we're in the mountains, they contour everything, and they do that contouring very simply by using an A-frame with a cross piece, tie a string in the center of the A, with a rock at the bottom, mark the exact center of the cross piece of the A-frame, and start with point 0 on their field. Put one leg down, move the other one until that string just comes right down the middle and touches. And put the next stake and move around with that A-frame all along the hillside. And as those stakes are laid out, then you're going to get the contour. About as close as you're going to get, even with using a tripod. And then they build this raised row according to that contour. Then, when the rains come down from the side of the hill, they get caught in those raised rows because they're pretty high, depending upon the slope. And with that, then they not only absorb the moisture, but they stop the erosion. And so, looking at the raised row, you start with 3 rows of black bush beans on the top. They're planted first. After they get a pretty decent start, then they put their corn down in the bottom and take up more of the moisture. As the corn grows, when the lower leaves start to move out and shade the growing beans, they take those off and use them to wrap up cornmeal and make a little tamalito out of it that they like very much. Corn leaf, maybe mix a little beans or a little chipilin, a wild plant that they eat, with that cornmeal, and used as a very special festive food. And then after the corn gets a good start and you've got those lower leaves off, you plant in between 2 and 6 bush beans, black beans, their favorite, at the base of the corn. This is all open pollinated corn, so they're big, heavy, thick stalks. And they can be used to hold those beans as they grow up. Then in between, they put squash. The squash is a big leaf. And that stops the sleet leaching of the moisture from the sun. And it's coming later on as we get closer to the dry season. Also squash, you're able to eat the meat and the seed. So that's diverse foods, and they're just their basic foods. That's what they would choose. And I've even seen people go as many as 6. In between these, they're going to put every once in a while either a chili or a tomato plant, and then some peanuts in the side, every once in a while. Not to overcrowd, but just to get some in. So you're not going to be dealing with so many bushel per acre, but you're going to be dealing with so much food per quarter of an acre. And of course, because you're only dealing with hoes and machetes, and you don't use an herbicide, the wild plants that grow, there are 2 kinds they can use. Some are medicinal and some are edible. One of their favorites is the one that's called blado. That's pigweed. Take it when it's young, take off the leaf, and you make it into a spinach, just like you would. Put a little tomato and onion with it and boil it. And so they're getting then wild plants to eat, not a lot, but something. And then certain medicinal plants will grow there. And so this is the kind of agriculture that they're going to be focusing on. And here I think is where educational systems should be working in agriculture in these parts of the world. How can we get more food to be growing in smaller parts of the ground? Style of raised row, ways of contouring better, improvement in seed selection, not hybridization, developing techniques to gather corn seed right from the corn wheel, so that you're going to get a seed that's immune to all kinds of things, because you can watch the plant right from the beginning, take seed only from there. And so we've got a lot of room to grow in agricultural techniques here, and we haven't done that much. So I think that our people are looking more towards this than they are towards our form of agriculture, because we wouldn't be good with machinery. As you're going to find as you're working with the people, machines for us are still a mystery. Abraham Hernandez was chosen because he's a welder, he's a carpenter, and so he's dealt with electric machinery. And so he has more of a sense. But we couldn't just bring anybody in to work with those sewing machines. Because 99% of our people see these as absolute mysteries. So they have to go through a whole process of learning. Not only how to put the cloth beneath the needle, but what's happening with this machine. They'll have to get some kind of an idea. That'll be all part of the learning that goes on. So I think that this is the way. And since this is all hands-on, it's very easy to develop a very close relationship with the transcendental, with this form of agriculture. That's very important to the people. To kind of give an idea of an answer, more or less.
Yep. Excellent.
I think that our form of agriculture is something we're going to have to be watching very carefully of the dangers that we're getting into as we continue to struggle with food production. I don't think that we should be thinking the problem is food distribution and not food production. Because when you distribute crossing cultures, you're not letting the people have available to them what is of utmost importance to their own basic chance to live culture. So I'd rather have we look at the world instead of rich and poor, according to cultures. I want to go just a short time now, and then I'll shut up. It's going too long, and I get going off in different directions. And I'm not an anthropologist, so of course I can't give you a long dissertation in anthropology. But I'll have to steal from one. I'd like to use Gerard Lenski. And 5 categories of cultures that he has come up with, using these categories in his own writings as growth in culture. I don't want to deal with that. I want to, these are the cultures people want to live, give them a chance. Give them a chance. And he uses these 5, again, categories now, so leaving a bit of space. It's not the only thing that people are going to do, but it's going to be the key thing, and the others are built around that. Built around that. And he uses these 5 because he said they existed since the beginning of written history. They exist today. Will probably exist until the end of time. So he speaks of the hunters and the gatherers. We're all familiar with that. Now, hunters and gatherers exist today. The Maasai and Pygmy people of the African world, the Bedouin people of the Arab world, and there are people along the Amazon that live that life. Then there are the simple horticulturists. These are the people who plant small plots of ground using wooden tools, like the famed planting stick. As that becomes a sacred object. I've seen it used in Wilmington. Put it in kind of dry areas. They go down into the ground, up and go back and forth and drop in 5 seed and then step them down. So I watched this fella doing this. I just couldn't wait till he went home. I wanted to go and measure the distance between the hills of corn because he was going so fast. And he did finally go home, and I went up and measured, and it was just about the same distance. Of course, he's been doing it since he was 4 years old. I guess you pick up the technique. Simple horticulturists. Then there are the advanced horticulturists. These are the people who farm small plots of ground using metal tools with no moving parts. Metal tools and no moving parts, like the hoe and machete. You're going to start to, as we come to the end of coffee picking now, you're going to start seeing people move around carrying hoes and machetes, especially with this little bit of rain. They're going to be out in the fields getting fields prepared for planting corn. The big 10-inch hoe, the long 28-inch machete. Then there are the agrarian people. These are the people who farm using mechanized equipment. That's ours. Okay, when I was a kid, 40% of our nation were agrarian people. Today, 1% is. It's a fear that we have with all of the land in the hands of very few. And then there are the industrialists. Now this is the culture we're familiar with, that's our primary culture. And it is also the culture on earth today that it's in its golden age. It's the strongest culture on earth today. How many nations? Somewhere between 25 and 45 would make up the industrialized culture in the world today. Clinton, in 1999, spoke of 25 nations in his State of the Union address. Then he had brought them together in December of that same year to speak about globalization and how it will affect the world. Well, they're led by what we know as the group of 7, sometimes group of 8. And we see them in the papers every year, where they gather together as a group to deal with the world economics. They are the nations of Japan and Germany, Italy, France, and England, USA, and Canada. Then 3 years ago at a meeting in Denver, Russia was added. And that was always interesting to me. Why? Is it highly industrialized? Well, no. But beneath the Siberian ice cap, all kinds of non-renewable resources, especially natural gas and oil. And technology today gets at it. Therefore, become part of it. Group of 7-8. Japan, Germany, Italy, France, and England, USA and Canada, plus sometimes Russia. Well, there are a couple of interesting things about that culture. They all have some form of democracy for government. And they all have some form of capitalism for economics. Except there's one least common denominator amongst all of the capitalist techniques that are used. Now this is good, this isn't bad, huh? I just presented it as part of the culture, and that's fine, people can live this. It's my culture, it's the one I am comfortable with. And that least common denominator is that profit is the sign of growth, or that all is going well, or is the good. That's the way you can determine that the economics are functioning well, through profit. And profit is attained by producing low and selling high and lots. And then that grows, profit grows, the economy is strong and growing. All fun, no difficult. I would want to defend the premise that the Mayan people of rural Guatemala want to live the advanced horticulture life way. I'd use 4 reasons. 1, heritage. Our people, by heritage, are small hands-on farming. Our golden age, that was the major part of the population's work. Hands-on agriculture. Their own fields. It was interesting, in 1988, the university called Landiva in Guatemala City, a very high quality private university, did a profile of Guatemala. And they came up with one of their conclusions. It is a Mayan belief that corn produced by you on your land is better tasting and more nutritious. And the women constantly, and these are the people who know because they are the sustainers of life through food. They say, vende más is the expression used in Spanish. You get more tortillas to the pound of corn. Well, there's just absolutely no way in this world that would stand up to a scientific investigation. But then, of course, there's no scientific investigation that would stand up to a Mayan belief. And so, heritage, very important. Secondly, the Episcopal Conference of this country, made up of the Roman Catholic bishops, has been recognized, especially at the time of the signing of the Peace Accords of 1996, after 36 years of civil war, as the voice of the poor. The reason those who claim to be the voice of the poor, the United Guerrilla Front, was given the opportunity to be a political party. And so they put all of their efforts and all of their finances into the development of a political party so that they would be able to bring about the changes in the country they wanted to, but through the political system. And so the bishops from then on were recognized as the voice of the poor. Well, they've written two very strong pastoral letters, one in 1988 simply called The Cry for Land. It's obvious what that was about. And as the voice of the poor, they were crying out. Of course, they received very severe criticism about that. And then in 1992, dealing with the 500th year of the coming of Columbus, of course they dealt with the coming of Christianity in these shows. But the major part and the major impact of the written letter was they showed the weaknesses, or actually the evils of the encomienda system of the Spanish. Well, these large land grants were given to people, friends of the crown. And these large land grants are pretty much in the hands of heirs of the original recipients. In order to work those large land grants, the people promising to civilize those that they had come, that they had here, they found and conquered, as it were. They think, the people don't think so, but they thought. So you're to civilize them, you teach them a civilized language, you teach them a civilized way of life, you teach them a civilized religion. All that went with that. Of course, then the people, in gratitude for your civilizing efforts, would work for you, work the land. Well, you can imagine the problems from that. Well, that system continued really pretty much strong in the country until 1968, when the Latin American Bishops' Conference in Medellin, Colombia, came up with that famous preferential option for the poor. Maybe you've read about that in some of the readings, and the influence of liberation theology. Well, again, condemned severely. Thirdly, you're not going to read a Guatemalan paper for a week without having two major articles, either in reporting, or more so editorial or analysis pages, of the people's cries for land. It's very possible that tomorrow there's going to be a major protest going on, a major, from different parts of Guatemala City going up to the National Palace, with the campesinos demanding the government fulfill its promises of making land available. And then fourthly, I don't spend a day in San Lucas without having a minimum of two people or groups of people asking me to help them get land. I don't spend a day here without that happening. I have to get land. So I want to believe this as the lifestyle or life way that our people prefer to live. And I think that even if they're just dreaming about heritage, I think they should have at least that opportunity. Land is key. Government statistic tells us 94% of the land is in the hands of 70% of the people. And then a private institution financed primarily by government, which is a commission that investigates the economics of the nation, came up with this. 80% of the arable land in Guatemala is in the hands of 2% of the people. It was criticized, but they stood firm on their data. Well, that being the case, people are not able to live the life where they want to live because they can't get land. That's grown to a point where during the years of the overt violence, 79, 84, 5, and following up no land available, people are rushing towards Guatemala City to the point now where a recent newspaper article showed we have 359 asentamientos. These are literally slums built up around Guatemala City. When I came in 63, 64, there was one slum through the center of the city. In a big gully, not through the center, but along that area. I was at now 359. That's where the maquiladores go. You can come in and bring in, put in those great big 1,000 sewing machine buildings. Put the people there. But anyway, because they're not able to live the life where they want to live, the rights you have as a human being, and these are rights because you were made in the image and likeness of the Creator. Food, health care, education, shelter, jobs, so you're able to work with the Creator and the continuation of creation, I'm going to want to add the sixth. Right to know the Creator through your own cultural milieu. And imagine the trouble they get into with bishops. But then theologians are talking about, you run across this all the time, Bob, culturization of the Gospels. Huh? Really? All right, what are we doing? Okay. But anyway, so far they haven't shot at least that. These rights that we have as human beings. When they're not able to be lived, we're in a situation just a few years ago, 4 or 5, United Nations human rights people came up with a study, social study of Guatemala as well as the other Central American countries. Around in Guatemala, they called Guatemala as the threshold of social explosion. One of the statistics they came up with on dealing with these human rights, these rights we have as made in the image and likeness of God, 53% unemployment. Now, the government said, oh no, underemployment, 6 of 1. Well, now we go back to our globalization, communication, getting to know you, getting to know all about you. We are the strongest culture in the world. We're in a golden age. Live it happily, live it with pride and dignity. So as we come to know you, getting to know all about you, get to know you and the culture you might like to live. And if we do want to reach out then, give them a chance to look and live it first. Then, if they want to change and become part of our culture, that's fine, but from a level playing field. Not from a situation where you're living in the process of poverty. Because that's what happens when you can't live the life where you want to live. Well, that's what is the outflow of oppression. We'll deal with that tomorrow afternoon. But because our globalization is seen primarily in economics terms, we say, oh my, you are unemployed. Now, it doesn't cost you as much to live as it does us up in Minnesota. Kansas, it doesn't cost you like we do in Minnesota either, but at the same time, yeah, in Minnesota. It's going to cost us $12,000 to build a house. That would be equivalent to, not the same as, but equivalent to a house that's going to cost you $120,000 to $140,000. The reason? Because we have to struggle with 74 degrees average temperature year-round. So when we talk about central heating, that means we close the windows. And central air, that means we open. That's it. We just have to put up black walls, nothing else. And our clothing, traditional clothing, literally, one set of clothing is all we need all year long. Whereas in Minnesota, you gotta have spring, winter, fall, summer. About the only thing in Kansas, you might get away from one of them. But you're gonna still have to have 3. And if you don't, you're gonna get sick. It's as simple as all that. And so you go down the line. So yes, we can live on a lot less income. Okay? So we're going to send clothing to you. And here's where Bob and I got talking years ago. And we're going to cut the cloth to size. We're going to ask you to sew it into the piece that's designed for it. And then this is the kind of money we can pay you so that we can produce lower, and it's going to be fine for you because that's all you really need. But then we can sell high and more. And our profits increase, so that's good for us. And you got jobs, so that's good for you. Well, that's right, except for this. And that's where we've got to start. Now, I think that there's a step in that. And that's precisely what you people are involved in today. Rather than put up the maquiladores, the sweatshops, the slums of Guatemala City and relive the Industrial Revolution of the late 1800s of England, where you had the people take the land away from the people, have them sell it, come lean against the walls of the industry. of the sweatshop you had to have. Move out here. And instead of putting 1,000 machines, put 10 or 12. Okay? And then say, hey, look, we need you to sew this clothing cheap because you don't need as much as we have to have. We'd like to use people that have good hands because then you can operate those better. Well, we got good hands. That's what we've been using for all of our work ever since we were 4 years old, so our hands are good. Okay? Sew it. And out here, so long as we can raise our own food, our own agricultural product, we're still agriculture season. So we have time. So we could keep a small sewing machine operating going, and even if it's going to be 3-hour-a-day shifts, that's okay. We can keep going 24 hours if needs be to meet the demand. You get lots of other different people involved. And so this becomes a cash crop, or an addition to, not the base for. Now, Mattel, the Barbie doll people are trying some things in Asia. And just recently it came up in our paper that the United Nations will start talking to the industrialized world, try and move the maquiladoras, make them smaller and move them into the rural countries. Keep them away from this crowded urban spread. The United Nations start to talk about that. They usually start gentle because it's such a shock, stuff they come up with, these big companies can't think of less than 1,000 because you've got to have all of this in this efficiency. Efficiency, if that's not taking into consideration people and culture, then it's not efficiency. It's relegating people to a commodity that just becomes a part of the cost of production, as the rest of the innate objects involved. And so was that music to my ears, Bob? I wanted to mention that to you, to hear the United Nations beginning to talk about this. So the struggle. In the meantime, because people live like this, they suffer the process of poverty. Tomorrow at 3:30, I'd like to visit a little bit about that. Yesterday we were looking a little bit at the idea of, rather than looking at the world divided into two, the rich and the poor, and the have and the have-nots, it really would be better to look at it as it is. That is, a world made up of various and sundry different cultures, with people wanting to live them. And of course, with the impossibility amongst many of these cultures, because of the process of poverty living. Better still, because they're not able to live the culture they want to live, then the result is the process of poverty. Now, I wanted to look today a little bit at the process of poverty. What comes about when a culture is not able to be lived by a people who want to live it. I like to use the term process of poverty to help distinguish from simply being poor. Juan Sobrino, the great liberation theologian from Salvador, speaks of this as the slow road to death. And I think he speaks of it very well. To define it, I wouldn't be able to. Describe it, I'd like to attempt. To do that, I'm going to have to use some statistics and some studies. Now, we must understand that statistics and studies are not scientific facts. They're something by which we're able to get a little bit better handle on an idea. for a little bit of better look at a thought. The study I'd like to use is taken from the University of San Carlos, the national university of this country. It was basically an urban study, so it only has limited value for us here in the rural area. Plus, it's fairly old, 10 to 12 years. So again, its value is limited. However, there are aspects of the study I think that are still valuable to a notion of the process of power. Their study showed that at the time they made it, the average Guatemalan family had to have $37.50 to survive in a day. If a job was available, the earning power was $14.50. Now that's going to change when it gets into the rural area. That certainly has changed today, the numbers anyway. But the distance between the two, if anything, has gotten wider. Then a series of statistics that I referred to a little bit yesterday when speaking of the Human Rights Organization of the United Nations. The acronym used for them is MINUGWA. Their main mandate is terminating now in December of this year, but they're in the process of setting up regional offices to be handled by Guatemalans. A very key person in our whole effort here is on contract with them for this year as they prepare these regional offices. He's helping to do the training of people that will be involved. Well, they did a study, the MINUGWA did a study of Central America. And their paper, I believe I mentioned this yesterday, that will give an idea of what Guatemala looks like to them through these series of statistics that they found out about the human rights. They entitled the paper that they did about Guatemala as Guatemala is on the threshold of a social explosion. And I think they spoke of that also well. Yesterday I mentioned a little bit about the 6 rights we have because we are made to the image and likeness of God walking on earth. Generally speaking, the number is 5. They dealt with 4. They dealt with housing or shelter. They said Guatemala is 1,200,000 units short. At the time that came out, the government said, oh, we're 2 million short. Of course, the government was involved in looking for funds from the international community for housing programs. They had 2 big ones. One with the acronym BANVI, and the second with an acronym for WABI. And both went belly up because of corruption. 1,200,000. Education, MINUGWA said we are 70% illiterate here in Guatemala. The government said, no, 38. That organization I mentioned, the commission that investigates the economics of the nation, they said, no, we're much closer to 7. A year ago, this past December, the World Bank and the National Development Bank and the National Development Fund did a study of educational systems throughout Latin America. They found the lowest, the poorest of all, was that of Haiti. They looked at the number of students studying, availability of studying, quality of school buildings, quality of curriculum, quality of textbooks, quality of teachers. Haiti was the worst. Guatemala, just a hair better. The second lowest on the ladder of educational possibilities and value of education in any of the Latin American countries. So we have a long ways to go. Healthcare. They said 46% of the nation has no access to professional health care, leaving, of course, then 54% with that availability. But by far, these are the people, most of these people have the health care that's available only through the public health system. We live in a country where government and government institutions are endemically corrupt. And so the healthcare personnel in any of these centers is very well paid, relatively speaking. So much so that there's no money left for medicine. So a person could go to the public health, get a good diagnosis and prescriptions for medications needed, not be able to buy them. So, sounding the cynic, but there's more truth to it than just cynicism. You can go to the public health center and find out exactly how you're going to die. And then the statistic that I referred to yesterday, 53% unemployed. How the government said no, not on and under employed. Well, again, the fear of being a cynic, I think you have to be a little careful to try and say that a person polishing shoes with 40 others in Central Park is employed, even underemployed. They're trying to survive. Taking a look at these again, not scientific facts, but just little helps to get an idea. Allow me to put forth a hypothetical case. As I mentioned yesterday, within the Mayan thought pattern, in a relationship, the male is provided. Let's say the man gets sick, the man of the home gets sick. So he loses a day of work. On a good day, things were bad. No, he even loses that. And the second day, then, the wife says, geez, you better get yourself to the doctor, guy. This doesn't look good. So he happens to live in 54% of the country. So he goes to the doctor. Now, that's going to cost him 10 to 20 quetzales. Well, even though it's supposed to be free. The reason is twofold. A, the fellow thinks, if I don't give him something, he's not going to give me a good diagnosis. B, the doctor thinks, well, I know, but if somebody gets something for nothing, they don't appreciate it, so you ought to give me something. Besides, they're doing them a favor. So then the doctor says, for example, if we're going to say you have bronchitis, and you better get some medication because this could get bad. We know from our experience in the clinic that the cost of bronchitis medication can run somewhere between 75 and 100 quetzales. And the doctor's going to say, hey, take a couple more days off, guy, because if this gets into pneumonia, we've got to get some fun. The fellow earning the $14.50 a day can't talk about sick leave or health care, etc., because if he does, there's at least one, as many as 3 people waiting at the door for his job. And so then we see what happens. On a good day, things aren't so good. When you get a bad day, then you start having some fun. Then you accrue a debt. So you literally are in a spiral going down. Process of poverty. So you're literally forced to look for something to eat every day. Try as best you can to protect your young. No matter how you look at it, that's the lifestyle of a wild animal. I got a terrible lesson in that. Exactly what that means. Because early on our stay in the latter part of the 60s, we had 2 psychologists with us giving us one of those interpersonal relationship workshops. Remember those? So popular for so long. Well, they gave us one. It was a good one. And both of these psychologists were excellent speakers, had the material well in hand. They're also writing a book together, so they had a chance to stay on here in Guatemala for about 3 weeks after the session, which is only about 3 days. And in so doing, they'd work on their book in the morning. In the afternoon, especially towards the end of the day when people were coming home from work, they'd go around to town and just observe. Just before they left, they came to me and said, say, Greg, we've observed something in our stay we think that you ought to be aware of. You've got to be aware. I was very taken with that. Oh, good. Well, what can you tell me? That you're going to have to be prepared to understand that your people see themselves as wild animals. So, yeah, your people see themselves as animals. I said, come off that. For goodness sakes, how can you possibly say something like this? You're a psychologist and an anthropologist, stay in your field. You're a lousy 3 weeks in Guatemala. All you can get in Guatemala in 3 weeks is amoebas. 3, you don't even speak the language, so come on. Where do you get this, see themselves as animals? That's what we've observed. You pass it on, take it or leave it. I left it righteously for less than a month. Standing on the corner out here where we were building this house for us. Neighbor fellow lived across the street, sells dinner to me. Well, a cocky fellow. Liked to wear the sombrero on the side of his head, spring in his step, and something smart to say as he walked on by. Well, this day was different. I watched him as he came coming home from work down the dusty street out there. Sombrero was flat in his head, carried the big hoe machete, was agricultural tools of the people. He shuffled. And Celestino just isn't supposed to shuffle. But he did. So much so that I can still see those puffs of dust coming up from those sandaled feet. So they came on by. I said, "Hello, Celestino, how are you?" He stopped looking me in the eye. He said, "You really want to know, brother?" I said, "Sure, that's why I asked." He said, "I figured out something today." "What's that?" I said, "I'm an animal." "Yeah," he said, "I'm an animal." I said, "Come off it, Celestino. You're an animal. You can think, you can speak, you can do what you want." He said, "Come on." Working the guy's field today, he came and showed me out on the hoe. "Padre, I've been working with a hoe since I was 4 years old. This guy's never worked with a hoe the day of his life. He owns the fields. We do the work, and he pays us 50 cents a day for our work. It's not much, not enough. Half of my kids are dead because I can't give my wife Lola enough to feed them. But it's something. I've got to have that 50 cents. You know what? The way he showed me how to hold the hoe was wrong, and I couldn't even do my work right. I can't read and I can't write. My wife Lola cannot read, she cannot write. None of our living kids go to school because we can't afford it. But besides that, he said, "Look, brother," and he pointed out the house, typical of that time in which he lived. 10, maybe 12 feet square. Corn stalks were sized, one door, one window. Brass roof and a dirt floor, in the middle of the dirt floor, 3 rocks. He called it a stone. I said, "Padre, I keep my family in there. You wouldn't keep an animal in there. And if I'm not an animal, whatever." I couldn't answer. I just stood there, looking at him, until he turned his heel and walked away. What else are you going to think of yourself if you live like that? And why? Why must the people live this way? Well, I've got to give you an opinion. And it's an opinion, so you take it out. Okay. I hope it's built on 40 years experience. It could be built on 1 year experience 40 times. Take that into consideration. That happens. More than you'd like to. I try and read at least 2 papers a day, as you're going to read a newspaper. Most of the time 3. As you go through looking for things of interest. I'm constantly talking to people. That's just part of every day, a considerable part. And they're speaking, and so they're telling me lots of stuff, just hoping they can catch on. And then I've had the 2 people go through this material. 2 people who are very, very aware of Guatemalan scene. One, Jose Garcia Bauer, deceased now 3 years ago, this last Christmas. International lawyer by profession, 7 times on Congress. In his own lifetime, 3 times involved in writing constitutions for the country of Guatemala in his lifetime. So a man who was quite aware. A second, Carlos Gerlach Mata, medical doctor who spent his life, his career, teaching in the Faculty of Medicine at the University of San Carlos, and also very much involved with a political party called the Christian Democrats at the time. So much involved that when they won the election, the first duly elected Democratic president after many years of military dictators. They asked him to be the Minister of Health. And he said, "Yeah, I will, if A, I'm free to look for corruption, B, if I find it, blow the whistle, something's done." Well, it took them 4 months into their power before they said, "All right, bring your luggage and come along. We'll let you look, and if you find something, we'll do about it. Do something about it." Well, he looked, he found, nothing was done, and so before his 4 years of service were up, he left in protest. He is now retired, from teaching and from practice, and he is a voluntary member of an organization with the acronym a CS that deals with the social situation of Guatemala, just the society and the sociology of the country. So these two people went through it and made some changes, of course, and I've included those, obviously, with that kind of background. But built on that now, I'd like to offer you this opinion: the social, political, and economic structure of Guatemala. I'd like to use for a kind of a framework the volcano. Because a volcano is a very small top held in place by a huge base. Secondly, a volcano might be inactive, but it ain't inert. You can never tell. And that's always been an interest here. You know, we're at the base of two of them. If you ever hear rumble, it's which way do you run? You know, it's up there, it's water over here, and that way's into us. But they are, even though they're not inert. At the top, what is it that keeps the political, social, and economic situation of Guatemala? That is the gateway to the process of poverty in place. I'm going to put most of all corruption. When a nation is endemically corrupt, every single aspect of the political framework suffers from that, all the way down to the lowest level, and even reaches out to cooperatives and to institutions that are supposed to be benefiting. Corruption becomes an integral part. In other words, the elected officials just simply feel, well, this is ours. We do what we want. It's not been given for the people. In fact, in the last administration in this country, it's proven to be much more corrupt than we thought at one time. At one time, we thought it was the most corrupt government in the history of Guatemala. Now we find out it's worse. A lot of the people now being shown to have stolen. They're talking to the Minister of Finance in an interview with the paper, and one of the questions asked dealt with, well, how about transparency of the finances? He said, government is a charitable institution. You don't have transparency with charitable institutions. Oh, didn't hear about that. Did you hear about that, Bob? But anyway, just that kind of an attitude. Corruption leads to impunity in the court system. That's what you maintain it. We have a court system here that simply does not function. Just to say it very simply, but say it as it is. It just doesn't work. We're a nation that is the staging area to move Colombian cocaine from Colombia to the US and Canada, to Europe and to Russia. We are one of the two nations in this hemisphere that are on the blacklist for laundering drug dollars. We have a murder rate of 7 times per capita of that of the United States of America. We have a little over a car an hour being stolen. And I could go down the line. And of the 11 million people, we have 7,000 in jail. And most of them are awaiting sentence. And will probably never be sentenced, just be free. I think that just tells you in itself. We can bemoan the fact that our own nation, per capita population in jails, is greater than any other place in the world. But also shows we have a system that makes people who are supposed to be behind bars, by far, most of them are. Now, obviously there are mistakes, but for the most part. Here, there's just a situation in the paper last week. A fellow was being sought for a murder on the streets, the afternoon streets of Guatemala City. When they finally picked him up, he had 27 times been in jail, accused and never prosecuted. 27 times. Now finally murder. Impunity. That, of course, gives room to delinquency. To the point that we have editorials in the newspaper every once in a while, just talking about we live in anarchy. Although it's a pretty pessimistic look, it's also a little bit more realistic than we like to believe. And of course, that gives that room for the drug stuff. As I mentioned, staging area for Colombian cocaine. They used to pay in quetzales when they landed small planes and small out-of-the-way airports, coming in with the speedboats off the Atlantic or Pacific coast. Now they pay in cocaine. And as that cocaine has to be sold to get their money out. So that starts moving the habit like crazy in the country. Marijuana can be raised in these mountains without any kind of a problem. Who's going to find it? That's the local drug of choice because it's so easy. Was it last year? Very beginning of last year? 2 tons of cocaine was stolen from a warehouse where it was being kept for evidence against those who had been prosecuted. 2 tons. Well, that's one big fellow with some big pockets. I remember talking to a priest friend from up to Coban, where there's a lot of that movement of cocaine going on towards the 10 area to the north and then through into Mexico and up to the U.S. And I said, you know, we read a lot in the paper about cocaine. Yeah, he said, there's quite a bit around there. A friend of mine, a lawyer friend of mine, got picked up with some cocaine in his pickup. So when they took him to court, and the cocaine along, he just mentioned to the judge, oh, that's part of the cocaine that was stolen from that warehouse. Was holding it for evidence. Oh, that's it, out, go, and take your cocaine, take your pickup, get out of here. Case all done. Afraid to even deal with it. So, drugs are really bad. Then I want to put the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, International Development. The reason for that isn't because they want to see things good, but they go about it incorrectly, I think. And the banking system is part of the industrialized world, the industrialized culture. That dealing with how to service a debt is something that is understood in that culture, not in the hands-on agriculture. And so once you start dealing with borrowing money and paying back, we don't know how to handle it. And I think it's very true when you take a look at what's happening with the foreign debts of these countries. We read about that every once in a while. Also, during the 70s, when the World Bank was rich with petrodollars and wanted to move it, they were making loans all over Central and South America. The military dictators were taking the government by coups. They're thieves. Stole government. You don't loan money to thieves. How do you expect to get it back? But more important still, rather than coming and asking the people, finding out through anthropologists and sociologists what really would be good for the people, they dictate from there. They say, this would be good for you, this is the way it's going to happen. Once you dictate from outside, it's not going to work. And so I put the World Bank up there. Again, not because of malintent, as is corruption, but just you're going at it backwards, guys. Remember how every once in a while they'll have somebody, every so many years, some lower echelon World Bank person will come through with this. They'll talk about this. And I said, geez, you guys shouldn't be dealing with tens of millions of dollars loans. Don't do that. Break it down so you can start working in programs where it can really be effective for people. Once you start talking about anything over $1 million, programs in these rural areas can't handle something like that. It's way too much too fast. It's got to be a slow, gradual process. Well, they said it's not worth our while. It's too costly for us. Well, then I said, you better change your ways, because you're not going to be effective for the people. I said, and secondly, I said, why don't you guys get anthropologists and sociologists on your programs? They should be key people in your decision making. Well, you know, we're a banking system in this thing. You're crossing cultures. If anthropologists and sociologists aren't involved, you're going to have trouble. But by golly, I got a telephone call of all things in the world from Arizona State University. A fellow named Brown, who I knew in the 60s when he was doing his doctoral thesis over here on the other side of the lake. He would come over every once in a while to be with the two anthropologists doing their doctoral theses here. At 2 different times. They get together and visit. He said, Greg, you're not going to believe this. What am I not going to believe? The World Bank just hired me as an anthropologist. I said, come on. Yeah, they just, oh, come on. Yeah, he said, and I'm coming down, coming through. And I talked the guy into stopping over. So they came over. Here, geez, I shook hands, congratulated, you know, wonderful thing. Starting in. And they said, yeah, we're going to give it a try. So it works out. And again, it was a couple or 3 months after that. It wasn't too long. I got a call from this Brown again. I don't remember his first name. And he said, Craig, they won't let me out of the office. I'm stuck. But at the same time, if these are steps, I think it's a good thing. Within the country, there's an institution called CACIF. Now that's a committee of the agriculture, commerce, industry, and finance people of this country. Remember, Garcia Bauer said, Greg, you got to remember that the agriculture people have 70% of the wealth, therefore power. Gerhard Martin immediately moved in, but you can't separate. They're all the same. The people who have their base in agriculture are also the commerce, also the industry, and also the finance people. To the point that a commonly given number of extended families in old country Guatemala is 18. I mentioned that a little bit yesterday. Commonly given, written about when we write editorials on this. A study, again, a doctoral thesis by a young woman from the University of Madrid, following the present owners of the original Spanish land grants, found that they were pretty much in the hands of heirs. And she came up with 22 families, extended families, owning the country. And a very prestigious editorial writer for Prensa Libre. He writes every once in a while, not every day. And, but well recognized as a good writer and very aware of the situation in the country. While giving a series of lectures to forensic anthropologists up in the Rabinal in the northeastern part of the country that suffered so during those years of overt violence, where the forensic anthropologists were studying the unearthed common graves, determining the people. Well, during one of those conferences, he said 9 extended families own the country of Guatemala. So they have their national security system, and that's the military. Now here my neat little scheme starts to break down because the military is so terribly divided up. They are the key people involved in drugs. That being the case, they don't have to depend so much on the wealthy of the country to sustain them. They become more independent. To the point now where there's a recognized parallel government. There's actually a parallel government that operates in the country. And that parallel government is primarily military, drug, and laundering dollars people, all working hand in hand. The U.S. is involved in trying to follow somebody here in the country, recognize no one. We're a very small country, only the size of the state of Ohio. 11 million people, can't be too hard to find. He's just a terrible person. Every which way, the evidence and stuff they have against him. Finally, the U.S. put out $2 million reward to pick him up. You can't catch him. He's part of this parallel. No. I gave 20% of the power to a duly elected Democratic president. Both Gerhard Mata and Garcia Bauer laughed at me and just said, go ahead and put it down. But a duly elected president doesn't have near that amount of power. Then there's the Congress and the middle class. Now there, I think, is the hope in the country. The Congress under the last regime, the last government, was overloaded with the FRG, the official party members, and so they just rubber stamped stuff through. That made for more corruption. Again, like I mentioned, the most corrupt in knowing what about history. But there are always some good people. In the present Congress, there's some good people. I saw in the paper the other day complaining no new laws or anything had come out yet. Well, that's not saying that's not bad. Maybe they're taking some time to look over things to see what they can come up with. You know, we're only in the government since the middle of January. And the middle class, that's the hope. Difficulty is it's so small. How can that grow? With the growth of the middle class, I think we have growth in Guatemala. Now, middle class is relative. There'd be middle class in the urban part of the world, of this, our world, Guatemala, and then urban class in the rural areas. Middle class in the rural areas, in the towns, communities. But it's basically that middle class. They are the people who are, why don't we stand most to lose if Guatemala goes up in flames again, as it did during those 36 years of civil war, especially 79 to 85, 84. And so they're the ones that would be more concerned and work the hardest. And they do. They do. Again, small. Held in place by 84% of the nation, living in what the government's going to call pobreza, and then they start to make the divisions, You know how it is. You got this level of poverty and that level. Pobreza, Buddha. No matter how you look at it, it's the process of poverty. That's what's happening. Now you can see how the trade agreements and all of these types of things can function. They can come into a situation like that and say, oh good, we can give you jobs and get a middle class built up by paying salaries, even though they're small, they're there. So the maquiladores that we spoke about yesterday. With the rush of people, it's terrible, crowded urban spread. Leaving the rural areas because you can't get land, because of the violence, because you can't work the land, one of those reasons. Well, one of the big problems that we face here in Guatemala with these maquiladores, basically it's the textile industry. I think that we're all familiar with this, these sweatshops. One of the main problems we face is the people they look for are 15 to 18-year-old young Mayan women, because the hands are so agile and they're so adept with their fingers and hands because of the weaving, the making tortillas, the sewing that they do. And then, of course, they're very docile because they've never seen anything but the little communities they live in. Talk them into coming in and working the maquiladores, and once you see the lights of Paris, wow. This is the heart and soul of our Mayan culture. Because woman is the source of life and sustainer of life through food. And so, well, if I'm crossing cultures, I'm coming into someone else's home. If I'm coming into someone else's home and it's suffering, my presence either helps that, to relieve that suffering, or adds to it. If it adds to it, get out. If it relieves, work harder to help relieve more. So every morning when I get up, I got to say, hey, Greg, what are you doing about this guy? That better be part of my everyday morning prayer. You're here, they're suffering, what are you doing about it? So the efforts that we're involved in. Questions or thoughts now as I go into this last little stage, and I'll let you alone.
I haven't heard anything about taxation.
Yeah. And I'm sure as a certified public accountant, person who works at that, you can be aware. We have the worst tax system in Latin America. The lowest taxes and the least collected. Yeah.
How do they tax people here?
Well, there's a very small land tax,
Okay,
and that's not much.
okay.
For the small person, it's wonderful. For the big guy, it's and then you got all kinds of opportunities to break the taxes. Secondly, there's a certain, that property tax I want to talk about now. And then there's a head tax, small on the municipal level. You pay so much per person per year.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. Here on the local level, there's land that used to be the woodlot that belonged to the community, and now since they used up all the trees for firewood, it's property that they're able to rent to people on a yearly basis. And so long as you maintain that 25 quetzales of quetzal rent, you can work up to 4 quetzals and even pass it on to heirs. And then that 25 quetzales, which is very little, but it's some income for the municipality. Then there's supposed to be a certain amount of tax on coffee grown here and then shipped out, and avocados. Well, that's very little, and it's usually not paid attention to. Then there is an added value tax. That's the easiest collected. It's kind of like the sales tax. When you got food, when you start going through invoices and all. But most of our food is sold in open market. How are you going to get a sales tax on that? And so it's not really very good. Income, very little. Very little.
Very little income or very little income tax?
Very little income tax.
Do they have a system, a form, and everything like we have to do in America?
Well, it's supposed to, but no.
There's no follow through?
No.
Thank you.
So the government, or whoever, does not really get much revenue from any kind of tax?
Not from within the country, no. Relatively speaking. They get an awful lot of help from outside, and they're always borrowing from the World Bank. They're just upping debts. There's just no way this country can pay off their debt. In fact, I don't know if I mentioned this, but supposedly an economist from Managua recently did a study on the gross national product. Oh, there's a tax on export. You export so much, you gotta okay, small. But we're involved in that with our coffee.
Yeah?
Yeah, small tax on export. And he did a study and took all of the taxing availability, gross national product, grants made by international communities, friendly communities, and he said his conclusion was the economy of Guatemala cannot function without laundering drug dollars.
Without laundry?
Laundering drug dollars. Now, it's not published yet. I don't know if you'll be able to get it published. But we are recognized as one of the 2 countries in this hemisphere on the blacklist. Guatemala and Haiti. We're coming up for review in January, or June. They're struggling all over the place to try and hide it. Besides, will the U.S. government take them off the list for the time being to give this new government a chance? If they take them off the list, that's what it's going to be for. But will they stop? No. Kind of a pessimistic look at things. But I'm afraid it's just way too much of the reality. As much as I don't like to accept it, but in my own heart, And when you've been in one spot for a long time, you don't like to see all of the shit. I don't like to see it a little bit bright. But even John Gardner, my cohort, really doesn't pay an awful lot of attention to that. This morning, he came by, he was listening to the radio as he was shaving and getting ready for the day, and he said, geez, got an awful lot of murders every day in Guatemala City. And they're coming out of John. That, you're going to be talking about 100. You got half a dozen here and there, you're not going to pay enough lot of attention to it. And so, and that's, because it's just so common, you kind of forget. Somebody was shot in the terminal market, and 3 people were hit by stray bullets and seriously wounded. Oh yeah, he hit again down in the Cabo couldn't get down, and he go right on. Just terrible attitude develops. Well, what are we doing about this? And here is, and allow me to put it quite simply now. We talk about, we use terms like programs and projects, but we're really involved in a process. And it's slow and it's gradual. And that is really what it is. It's efforts in process. Do we have answers? No. We have some ideas? We hope so. Well, how do they take shape? In efforts. Well, what about good, tight, hard programs ain't going to work across the cultures? We've got to work with people in efforts so that they can eventually, slowly but surely, and simply make things happen. I think we've got a real good example with the soy machines you bring down. The people now have done an awful lot of hard work to get those machines together and get them down here, and now you make them available to people. But you're not going to stand over their shoulders and tell them this is what you got to do and that's what you got to do, and if you don't do it, we're going to take the machines home. And to give them a chance to learn, and give them a chance to really put the thing in operation the way they see best. And that's what I mean when I talk about efforts in action. And all these efforts in action are in progress, in process. All are built on the expressed felt need of the people. I was hoping to read that clear yesterday. Not through no fault of my own. That's how we got started. The only reason is I'm not a professional cross-culture person, I'm not an anthropologist, I'm not a missionary, not a nothing. Just an ordinary guy that's supposed to be stuck out in rural Minnesota for the rest of his life. Okay? And got into this, didn't know what to do, and the people had to take care of it. In the process of taking care of it, they kept telling me, this is what you should be doing. I tried to respond to that because I didn't know what else to do. So basically, we're involved in infrastructure. We talk about that as land and housing. And of course, things spring out from that. In the housing, you're going to start getting young people can learn to be stonemasons, carpenters, plumbers, electricians, welders. So you're giving jobs, creating jobs. And then not just creating jobs, but 90% of these workers are apprentices. Then when they get good, they go off on their own, set up their own. We're real strong on that. That personal responsibility, that individual initiative, is so terribly important. I suppose that's capitalistic to the hilt. I am. Private property, personal initiative, personal responsibility, entrepreneurism, very important. And go with it. And we even use this now as an opportunity for kids that are trying to shake the drug thing. They can come go to work and see how they do. If they like the job, get to be good at it and get on your own. If you don't like it, try something else. You want to go to school, show us that you're willing to make the effort, and we'll give you a scholarship. We want to see what kind of effort. These guys get the terrible baptism of fire when they start in. They come out of the gangs, or drugs. They're given a very large rock in front of a fairly large rock to sit on and a 2.5-pound hammer. I said, you got that big one, make us a whole bunch of little ones. Literally, they make gravel. And they do that for quite a period of time. I can remember they had that first group that were working, I had them making gravel for 2 months. I said, well, there's one thing I found out, that you guys are smart. You can make gravel. I wonder if you're smart enough to put one block on top of another one to build a house. Oh, yeah. No, you can't do that. You guys, you run around in gangs, you haven't got enough sense to act like an individual, smoking pot, for goodness sakes, blowing your own minds. Nah, you guys aren't smart enough to build one. Give us a chance, we'll show you. By golly. They got their chance, and they sure showed us. They can do it. And so I've been very proud. Most of the kids have made it. There are a few that go back. But most of them have done a job. And I really respect them for it. So those are the kinds of things. And then within the land, just pescadito. Within the land situation, there's there's much more than just helping people get land and raise their own food. Here's we work with the reforestation, huh? So important. It's planting 50,000 trees out of that little nursery every single year, working with ecological systems and understanding, appreciating all of that type of thing, and training in that area. Planting soybeans and the use of different kinds of trees, experimenting with macadamia nuts and shade with coffee. Our whole coffee program flows from this, where we deal with the producer tells us the value of his product. That's what we pay. And we're involved in the processing. They get paid. And we're involved in the packaging and shipping. They get paid. And then the coffee is sold at that cost. And that's what's determined. It determines the cost. Air shipped to $5 a pound toasted. This is less because it's not roasted, not packaged individually. But the determining factor is what the producer asks for his very best. But they have to have their best. So that we do all the processing all the way down to the consumer. We're as close to it as we can get. This is just one step away. That's E.F. Schumacher. Small is beautiful. Economics is diplomatic. The economist philosopher. That's his principles. We follow this effort. All these things spring from that. And then when it comes from jobs, you're doing all kinds of things. You've got this now this opportunity with the sewing. It can become. Not only is there a possibility of eventually local made t-shirts made here in Guatemala. Okay, you got a small company, you need some sewers, we'll try and do it for you. You meet your quality, give us the jobs. That. But there's also the local cloth. Once you got that local cloth woven, a lot of times it's basically a piece of art. How can we turn that into something that can be usable by a person or not just the WP that our people in the United States of America aren't going to be interested in wearing, but how can we move that into something that could have an international appeal? Sewing and processing will be involved in that. And the machines give us that opportunity. So all of those kinds of things flow from these areas of efforts. And that's what's going on. Now, along with this, of course, in order to be able to get that infrastructure to work, we have to have education. And as I mentioned several times yesterday, we're involved very much in education. We've gone from 97.5% illiteracy in 1964, an anthropological study from Dr. Clyde Woods, doing his thesis out of Stanford University, all the way to 85% literacy. To the point right now, almost every day we have 3 newspapers coming in. When there's not 3, there are 2. The fellow that sells them said that the least amount he sells on a bad day is 350 and the maximum is 700. Newspapers sold this little backwater town. Not bad. When we came in 63, 64, there was 1 school with 80 students, elementary school. Now there's 17, the same area. No secondary schools, now 7. No continuing education schools, now 4. No adult education, now every single weekend. Elementary and secondary equivalency for adults. And that building over there, school building, uses it all day, 7 days a week. Our part of the deal is an elementary school in the morning, 7:30 until 1. The rest of the times it's loaned to teachers who have their own classes going. In secondary school, teacher education, and high school, or elementary and high school equivalency for adults. So education has gone bananas. We got a long ways to go. Not only because of the quality of education, the teachers are not to blame. They haven't grown up seeing good teaching, but they have an opportunity to be well prepared, and so they have to struggle. It's only the highly talented ones that really can But they're the ones that are putting it all forward. That's that individual initiative, that entrepreneurism, that personal responsibility is terribly important. We have to lean on a whole bunch of heroes in our society to get ourselves out of this hole. And they're there. We just got to find them back. So education. Then healthcare. And we just have to make that available to them. All they need at the cost they can pay. As you know, healthcare is an extremely expensive situation. And we can't pay for our own any place in the world. Those of us without insurance, if we don't have insurance at home, we're in trouble. And even trying to get into charity institutions is really tough. Our cost of medicine isn't nearly that high here. But we have to make it available to the people at what they can pay, which isn't a lot. And that's basically some infrastructure for that. And how would we relate this to the transcendental? That's what I was speaking of all the time. That's the motivation. Why do we do this? Why do we work together on these things? Why are we all involved in this? And that's that whole idea. As the Mayas see it, Creator. We work with the Creator in the continuation of creation. That's what it means to be made to the image and likeness of